Welcome back to Franchise Player. Today we have a pretty cool video dropping, and we're going to be talking about 5 PSP launch titles. We'll talk about how these launch titles have aged on the PSP. I'll look at them from a lens, from '05, or at least try to. Before we dive into those 5 games, I want to talk about my experience with the PSP, my beginnings with the PSP. It was such a cool era of gaming because this was truly a huge powerhouse that had hit the market. Don't get me wrong, the DS was phenomenal. I loved my DS, but the PSP was truly home console gaming on the go, which was insane for the time period. So let's just jump right into how I originally got a PSP and how I felt about it during that time. So at least here in the US, man, the PSP came out in '05. I want to say Japan got it a little earlier, I think sometime in '04. But yeah, when this came out, it was a huge deal. It was like, whoa, PlayStation just jumped into the handheld market. This is crazy because it was something that Nintendo had basically owned that market for a long time. Don't get me wrong, Sega had tried to compete at one point with the Game Gear and things like that, but Nintendo was the king of handhelds. And the PSP coming out was a massive, massive deal because it was essentially a handheld PS2. It truly was console gaming on the go. You weren't really missing a whole lot from home console games. PSP was super, super legit when it came out, man, because it truly was home console gaming on the go. Sure, you were missing an analog stick, it only had one, but I mean, most of the games you were playing felt like true AAA home console games on the go. It was absolutely insane. But how we got these is, I believe it was close to my dad's birthday. I was really young. I was probably like 8 years old. Yeah, like '05, I was probably 8 or 9. And I remember my mom was wanting to get my dad a PSP as a gift. And the PSP that she actually got him, of course, was the 1000. It was the only one that was out at the time since it was near launch. And she had got him, it was this bundle. It came with like some Sony branded headphones. It came with the memory card. Mind you, the memory card I think was literally 32 megabytes. So you couldn't really download anything on it. It was pretty much strictly for game saves. And that just goes to show you how far we've come with memory, which is another insane thing. It was a really cool bundle. I remember when the PSP got home, when my mom brought it home, my dad and I were sitting at our kitchen table. We opened it up and it came with this basically like demo disc that kind of just showed you things that were available on the PSP. If I can find it online, I'll throw up like some video or screenshots of it. But basically it would show you, it was like a little demo where it would show you videos that were, that you could watch on your PSP, gameplay, things like that. And the PSP was just so crazy and felt so futuristic and ahead of its time. I mean, you could go on the internet, of course, if you had Wi-Fi, you could play games online, you could download music, you could watch movies on the UMD. I have a pretty big UMD video collection. If you want to watch that, it's on my channel too. But the PSP was truly just felt like a step into the future and felt super next gen. I mean, going from my Game Boy Advance to playing a PSP was just absolutely ridiculous for '05, dude. Enough of me just rambling about my beginnings with the PSP and memories and nostalgia and things like that. Let's get into these games. Let me know what you guys think of these games. Like I said, I've played a couple of them in the past, and a couple of them are basically brand new to me, so it'll be interesting to play them for the first time. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. What are some of your favorite PSP games of all time? Drop them in the comments. I'm always down to try new PSP games. And if you know any hidden gems, drop them too. Always open to that. All right, man. So let's get right into it. The first game that we're going to be checking out is Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix. And keep in mind, in 2005, when this game came out, when the PSP came out, that this series, Tony Hawk, was still on top. It was still the king of the skateboarding genre, the king of the extreme sports genre. And Tony Hawk was just badass, man. Like, having this game on the go was so cool. I originally grew up with having, Tony Hawk Pro Skater on PS1 when I was super, super little. And, Tony Hawk's Underground, I think, was kind of their last hurrah before, a couple of years later, Skate came in and just absolutely destroyed Tony Hawk. So this was not one of the first PSP games I had, but I did actually have this physically on UMD back when I was a kid. And looking back, I went online, it looks like IGN and GameSpot gave it pretty solid reviews. IGN gave it a 8.7 out of 10, GameSpot gave it an 8.5, so it was pretty well received at the time. So what was really cool about Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix is you had some pretty solid game modes. You had a story mode, you had a creative modes, you could play horse, which is, skate basically. You could play against friends. There was kind of like a free skate mode. And, looking back, I mean, you'll see here in the gameplay, the muscle memory does not hold up for you, boy, on Tony Hawk, man. I was struggling to get some decent scores and pull off some decent tricks here, but it was still really fun, man. Like, Tony Hawk had really just nailed arcade skating. Like, arcade skating was such a cool genre of games back then, and I don't know why, but it doesn't seem like skating games are really as popular nowadays or even really come out. And I know a lot of people love the Skate series. Skate 3 seems to hold up pretty well, but Tony Hawk, there was just something about it. It had some nice pop culture stuff in it. Like in this one you have Bam Margera, and it was kind of like intertwined with Jackass, it seemed, I think, at this time. But Tony Hawk's Underground 2 remix, I think, for what it is, I mean, for 05, I mean, I think this was about as good as they were going to get. I mean, this was pretty much a console quality Tony Hawk game in the palm of your hand. From what I heard online, it looks like they had reused some voice lines and stuff from the, PS2 version. I didn't really notice a ton of issues. I thought the audio was fine. I thought the soundtrack was fine. The only issue that I really have with this is that navigating the camera is kind of a hassle, dude. Without having that second analog stick, I know, hey, it is what it is with the PSP. They tried to make it work. It's not terrible because you skate and kind of move around with the D-pad, and you move the camera with the analog stick. And then when you get off your board and start running around, you move around with the analog stick. So the controls are a little funky. And I kind of expect clunky controls going back and playing some older titles, but I think this holds up pretty well. I'd recommend it. If you're a PSP collector or want to play some Tony Hawk on the go, I don't think you can go wrong with this one, man. Next up, we have Need for Speed Underground Rivals, and talk about another series that was, kind of on top of their game at this time. Need for Speed was incredible back in this time period. First off, this had, pretty solid reviews too. It looks like IGN and GameSpot gave it a 7.9 out of 10, so pretty good. I mean, especially for a launch title, when you're kind of getting things ironed out, like controls and just how to actually program and code games for a system. So 7.9 is a cool rating. This era was super interesting. You had Fast and Furious, which had taken off in like 01. You had all of these kind of street racing games and tuning games that had really influenced, I think, a generation outside of gaming, to where people got really into modding cars. These games got me really into cars too, and I think it did for a lot of others too. This game, I think, holds up really, really, really well. The graphics are pretty solid, I'd say, especially for a launch title. The soundtrack was pretty cool, especially for the time. It's interesting to go back on these games and just hear songs that are practically 20 years old. And it's really hard to believe they're almost 20 years old. But in regards for Need for Speed, man, decent car selection. I started off with a Miata. It's not like you can just immediately hop in a 350Z and start cruising around. You got to stack up a bit and get better cars. But the tunability of your cars, the modding of your cars is really, really nice in this game. Now, in terms of game modes on this, you had a quick play battle, race now, circuit race, pocket garage, which is basically to view your cars and all that. So there wasn't a ton of depth in terms of game modes. But I think when this came out, they're like, hey, we really need to get something that people can just, pick up and play, start racing, maybe play for, half an hour if they're on the road or traveling, and put it back down, pick it back up, and, play later. That's what I think was really cool about this era of games, is that they were truly handheld games, where it's like, hey, they were made for, quick bursts of play. And especially at launch, right, where they were like, hey, are people really going to want to dive in and sink a ton of time into these games? Do we even need to do a career mode, or should we just have some quick play options where you can customize your cars, pick up some new cars, and our people are going to be satisfied with that? But yeah, overall, I was really impressed with how Need for Speed Underground Rivals holds up graphically, especially for a launch title. You never know what you're going to get, but I think this looks pretty solid. The steering actually took me a little while to get used to, but after a few races, I was like, all right, cool, man. I got it. I'm used to it. But yeah, as you guys can see in the gameplay, I think it looks pretty good. I think Need for Speed is a play. I didn't have this originally when it came out, and this was my first time playing it on PSP. I think there's better racing options out there now for a PSP if you want to play. I think Burnout is just much more fun on the go. This is still a solid game. I don't think you can go wrong playing it, especially if you're a Need for Speed fan. But let's hop into the next game. Okay, so next up here for our PSP launch title, we have Ape Escape on the Loose. And this was rated, it looks like a 7 out of 10 by IGN. And it definitely had some negative comments against it, and I'll get into that in just a sec here because I feel the same way. But yeah, 7 out of 10. This was a remake of the, I guess, original Ape Escape from 99 on PS1. So it's going to have better graphics and some quality of life improvements, things like that. I don't know exactly what improvements. I never played the first Ape Escape on PS1, so who knows? If you're an Ape Escape fan, let me know. But yeah, I think graphically this game looks pretty cool still. I think it looks decent. With art styles like this, they're always pretty much going to age well. That's why older Nintendo games, for example, always look pretty solid. Like you can go back to a Nintendo 64 game or GameCube game and it doesn't look terrible because they don't necessarily go for realism. But yeah, like I said, graphically, I think this game holds up. It has a pretty cool art style, which I really like. But yeah, let's talk about IGN and other reviewers' complaint of it and my personal complaint. So even in 05, man, this was kind of an issue with not having a second analog stick. Mind you, I'd hopped on and just briefly played this, but when you're going around trying to catch the apes and capture them, dude, it's a huge pain because you constantly have to change the camera, basically. I think it's with L or R, which like refocuses the camera and turns it around. Because with that analog stick on the PSP, that's how you're moving. It's not the D-pad. So you have to constantly use L or R to recenter the camera. And then the face buttons are what you're going to use to either attack or capture the ape. So yeah, that was kind of a hassle. I could definitely see back then how it would have been a huge deal because people were like, hey dude, like I've been used to playing the Ape Escape games and never had issues like this with the camera. So I think it was kind of a hassle. Ape Escape is a cool game. I mean, it's a cool series. It's not one of my favorite games or series of all time, that's for sure. I probably enjoyed this one the least on the list, man, to be real, out of the 5. So I don't know, maybe worth it if you can get it for cheap or download it if you have a modded PSP. But yeah, I don't think I'd really recommend this one a ton, at least on this list. So this is the only sports game I have on the list. And before you guys start tripping out and go, man, I don't care about old sports games, they age terribly, I don't even like sports, take a second to just watch this, right? MVP Baseball 05 is widely regarded as one of, if not the best baseball game of all time. Graphically, yes, sure, it does not hold up very well like most sports games. But when this came out, this was a game changer. It was only rated a 7.7 by GameSpot, but I'll have a review by Soft Drink TV. I'll put it on screen here, where he does like a deep dive on this game, and it will kind of tell you what's great about it rather than me rambling about it. But he does a great job. I'll drop it on the screen. But yeah, this game, feels identical to the console counterpart in my opinion. I had this on PS2 back in the day and played it a ton. So of course we had to get it on PSP. It is lacking one of the game modes, which kind of sucks. It was like this mini game, but overall, I mean, it's pretty much identical where you're like, wow, like the PSP is really doing it big, man. This is a true console counterpart. I mean, it's a true console experience on the go, which was amazing for the time. And like I said earlier, just felt futuristic. The PSP felt like a huge jump in the right direction. One thing that I want to say about this game, and whether you're a sports fan or not, is the commentary by the announcers in this game holds up really, really well. Entertaining broadcast, that's huge to have in a sports game where it just doesn't feel like a bunch of pre-recorded lines with no life and like there's robots announcing what's going on in the game. There's some true personality, and I think it holds up really well. I think the gameplay is, yeah, sure, it's a little dated. The pitching isn't too bad. I thought the timing of the hitting is a little difficult. I guess that's maybe because I've more recently played MLB The Show. But yeah, if you're gonna get a baseball game on PSP, I don't think MVP 05 is bad to check out. But if you really want the kind of cream of the crop, top shelf baseball experience on PSP, go with The Show. MLB 06 and 07 are one of my favorites, and then the last one they made is MLB 11 The Show, I believe. So if you want a baseball game on the PSP that might hold up and not feel as dated, probably go with The Show. But MVP Baseball, man, it holds up pretty well. I definitely see why people still think it's one of the best baseball games of all time. Definitely think it's worth checking out. But yeah, as for sports games, I think this is about as good as it got for the PSP launch. Last but certainly not least is Darkstalkers Chronicle: The Chaos Tower. I was completely unfamiliar with this series. I'm not a big fighting game fan, specifically arcade fighters, I've just never really gotten into. I know they're great, but looks like this game had pretty solid reviews. 8.1 at GameSpot, 7 out of 10 at IGN. I obviously did not have this at launch since I'm just recently finding out about the game, but I had a great time playing it. After doing some research online, since I was super curious and I didn't want to go in this game just hella blind, was that this was originally a Japan-only Dreamcast game. And, you know, after looking at the graphics and stuff, it being Capcom, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see how this was a Dreamcast game. And when I went online, I looked at an old video review from GameSpot, and it seems like people were pretty positive about this. They're like, hey, you know, sure, it's a 2D fighter. The PSP can handle 3D. The game looks great, especially on the PSP screen. So I think people were, you know, pretty fond of having this on the go at the time. It looks like a couple different sources had said that this was the best fighting game on the PSP, or that you could possibly have on the go at the time, which, yeah, I could definitely see that at launch. I mean, I had a great time playing this game that, you know, the past couple days that I had it downloaded on my PSP. Decent amount of game modes, you know, arcade, the tower mode, which is pretty standard for most fighting games. And this is kind of like I talked about earlier, you know, peak handheld gaming in the sense that, hey, it was made for quick play sessions and you could hop in, you could hop out and not really have to dedicate or pour hours and hours into one sitting of the game, which I really miss about handheld games. So it looks like this game has over 20 different fighters or playable fighters, which I think is really cool, especially selection-wise on a handheld at launch. You're probably not expecting some fully fleshed out roster of fighters, but I think 20 is definitely a pretty good amount to choose from. Definitely enjoyed this game. I think the art style looks really, really cool. I can definitely see how this was a popular series or successful series, especially in the arcades. I love personally going back to arcade games now and playing a lot of shmups. I definitely want to get more into the beat 'em up genre, but yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with this on the PSP. I would definitely recommend Darkstalkers. Might be fun to play against a friend too, but yeah, it's just good old arcade fighting goodness, and you can't really go wrong with that, dude. So that's going to do it for today's video. Hope you guys liked checking out those 5 PSP launch titles and just kind of going back down memory lane. And you know, maybe you didn't have a PSP around launch, maybe you got one shortly after. Let me know your experience of when you got your first PSP or when you maybe first saw a PSP. I remember kids at school would have these out on the playground, and it was just such a cool era of gaming, man, where Sony really took a chance and they're like, you know what? We're going head to head with Nintendo. We're going to duke it out in the handheld market. And the PSP was super successful, man. I mean, did it sell as well as the Nintendo DS? No, it did not. But this system really changed the game. I'm glad it did so well, but I really wish PlayStation would make another handheld, man. I probably won't get the PlayStation Portal unless I can get one on sale or really cheap eventually. And it's a huge, huge bummer that the Vita had failed, you know, so much because of Sony. And it was basically on life support a year or two after it released. But yeah, next video I do, I'll probably have, you know, something similar to this where I go over 5 PS Vita launch titles and, you know, once again, go back down memory lane and, you know, just kind of reminisce and be nostalgic over the Vita and games that came out for it when it originally launched. Yeah, hope you guys liked the video. Let me know some of your favorite PSP games or memories. And as usual, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you soon with another video.